So, in the spirit of John's talk, I'm a person in long-term recovery from addiction and codependency. So this is how we look. And also been diagnosed with anxiety disorders. And codependency is very near and dear to my heart because it is so misunderstood. And I hope that this talk in some way can change your opinion of what this is about. So a lot of the people that I work with come into a conversation with me from a place of deep despair, from a sense of emptiness. And part of what we've understood about codependency in the past has been that historically we looked at it as the other of the addict or the alcoholic. And we found that there's a set of characteristics that that person shows up with. But recently some of the definitions are looking that the field has widened to more a learned behavior and a coping skill, and more a sense of the human condition itself. So here was me 13 years ago, just before my complete breakdown, before I went into stepping stones, this total disconnect with the exhaustion, this putting on the mask of perfectionism, of doing, of can get it right, must get it right, must always be perfect. And masking underneath that the absolute sheer emptiness and desperation. And so I like to look at codependent. When I get clients, they say to me, oh, I hate this word codependent because I'm not dependent on anyone. I don't know how to be vulnerable. So I put the little exclamation mark because there's so much intensity with behavior, always intense. So I like to call it an inner intimacy disorder. That seems to land a lot better for people. And perhaps we can look at it as a vehicle for healing, because it's turning towards the uncomfortable, turning towards this unfamiliar, but mostly the loss of our true selves. That's what this is all about for me. So one of the definitions, Whitfield, and I really encourage you to read his book about codependency that he calls the human condition, is this idea that it's the most common of all addictions that we suffer with, because it's the loss of self and it's the looking outside of ourselves, always for this thing that we can't find. And we neglect our own selves in the pursuit of that to such a great degree. So we look for it in people, places, things, and activities and experiences. So the wounding of our true self to such an extent that we developed a pseudo-self and we prop that up wherever we go. And again, you know, the underlying is this extreme acts of others' expectations trying to meet them. And what a loss to ourselves, what a loss to our own truth. So again, to just understand it's learned. So therefore the good news is it can be unlearned. But it really diminishes our capacity to be in intimacy with others in any very real way. And ultimately in intimacy with ourselves, in commune with our own discomfort. So again, Whitfield, he talks about the early stages of recovery. So when I work with people, they mainly come to me and there's such a sense of despair and frustration. And they say that no matter how much they try and people please, do, get things done, put up with really, really difficult and inappropriate behavior, they just feel a sense of deep emptiness. And some of my clients call it a not enoughness, or they talk about that feeling of Sunday afternoon just before I have to go back to school. And we are adults in adult bodies, but we still feel like those children sometimes. And so life is very chaotic at the edge of a codependent relapse. There's a lot of hyperreactive behavior. People are exhausted. And addictions and compulsions are on the increase. So often this is what arises, and we look at what John was talking about. If we look at a society where depression and anxiety and eating disorders, all of these disorders, or DSM disorders, you know, at the heart of it, if we're looking at this loss of self, then how do we work with that in a very real way? Where I also, so many times when I was at this place of compulsivity, and the compulsivity of a codependent is control. It can come through as manipulation. It can come through as really trying hard. When that's there, you know, how many times in my life over the years have I been prescribed antidepressants or benzos, and you know, I made a commitment to myself because my mom really struggled with addiction that I need to face something in myself. So I kept throwing the scripts in the bin and just sitting with what needed to be sat with, and sometimes hugely uncomfortable, but valuable. So where does codependency come from? Where can we look at it? And two aspects, and I know you can't really see that now, but I won't be hard on myself. So unhealthy family of origin. And I say to my clients, let's not go and beat up on our parents, because that's not going to help anything. So, we come from where we come from, they come where they come from, and it's intergenerational. We feed this thing and it goes on and on and on. But one of the main things about childhood is if you grow up in an environment where you can't be who you want to be, say what you want to say, or feel what you want to feel, in some way, it's not the trauma of childhood, it's the invalidation of the trauma, where it's not seen and not validated. In that sense, we grow up as children and we think, well, in some way I need to be something else in order to be validated and loved. And that's where we split off and this other little thing develops. And then the unhealthy society itself. I mean, does society not validate us when we're better than, when we're not vulnerable, when we go-getters, when we mature beings? Society validates all of those things. So how can we be vulnerable? How can we be feeling empty at times? It's not validated, particularly in work environments. So our needs go unmet, and then we internalize not only our parents' inadequacies, but society's inadequacies. And we sometimes say, well, codependents go, well, if I change myself enough, then I'll be loved. So I better be this version, because this version doesn't work. And so the disconnect, that says fear of abandonment. We do that out of a sheer fear of abandonment. And codependents, early recovered codependents, to this day, if they're compulsive on love addiction or whatever, fear abandonment more than anything. And that certainly was true for me and got me into a lot of trouble. And so what happens is, out of that fear, we generate more shame. Codependency sits on toxic shame, which is not shame where you've done something wrong and I can fix it. It's shame I am wrong. Something is fundamentally flawed in me. And this leads to other traumas as we go through schooling system, because the schooling system, then we also decide, well, maybe I'm not good enough in that system, because the schooling system doesn't acknowledge certain individuals in any way, shape or form, particularly if they're introverted or if they've got other qualities. And then we start with this adult child wounding, where the child goes into hiding in a very real way, and the pseudo-self starts taking over, this false self, as I call it. And for me, that showed up as heightened perfectionism at school, eating disorders, sport, studying, unbelievable amount of studying when I was very young, crazy. I mean, it's just insane behavior. And just trying to push it all down, because it was just feeling so overwhelming. But as long as I could go to school and they could see a certain thing, then at least the home life wasn't exposed at some level, which was hugely chaotic and dysfunctional. So the true self goes into hiding, that chronic emptiness again, that just can't be filled. So no amount of degrees. I was laughing actually as I came in here. I promised my husband that at the end of this year would be the last study. I've been studying. I was one of the original. When you said 20 years, I got such a fright. I thought it was about 14 years ago that I started. So okay, time is moving on. It can't be filled. Not with a relationship, not with a job, not with a new car, not with a facelift. Can't be filled. But the turning towards. So we try to fill that emptiness from the outside. And then we just end up where we are, frustrated. How much time do I have? 20 minutes. Lovely. So this is where we start working with recovery. We start in that place. So we go back to that adult child wounding and we do the work there. So the red flag for codependence. These are my 4 red flags. And I know when I'm relapsing is when I'm focusing on everybody else's needs. The codependent says, I often giggle, just if everybody else would change, I'd be okay. If I could just get them to do that, then I'd be okay. So we neglect our own well-being. I say to my clients, no is a complete sentence. There's no need to justify it. But codependents always justify, always overcommit, running around, and that's what makes it so chaotic. And then, putting everybody else in front of our own needs. There's a whole pattern of codependency, and it was so nice for me, and my clients also say it's so nice to know that there's actually a name for this thing, because they feel so crazy. It feels like there's a repetition compulsion in the behavior, and it is a compulsion. It's an obsessive and a compulsive disorder, because the thinking is obsessive, it never stops. And the compulsions end up being things like, if you replace the relationships, then it becomes exercise or work or food, or, it's compulsive. It goes against our own will. So what does recovery mean? So recovery for me is really acknowledging feelings. So what codependents do is they minimize or they alter or they deny how they truly feel. So they're never actually in touch. If I ask codependents how do they feel, they always go, oh, I'm fine today, even though they're cracking up. And I call fine freaked out, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. I'm sure you've all heard that. So I try now, and I say to them, okay is also just a store down the road. So we can't use okay or fine. What do we feel? And learning how to grieve. Codependents need to learn how to grieve because they've lived in a fantasy life about what life should be or what they thought life would be. And it's a grieving process of the reality that this is life and the embodying of this is enough. So they sit in a lot of grief, getting one's needs met, healthy boundaries. We're so enmeshed in other people's dynamics that we have to learn how to separate, and that's a painful process. Communication, choices, and then the guilt and the shame. And that's where the 12-step process is a really wonderful thing because we learn how to be with that in a very specific way. And shame needs to be worked with, and guilt, because we've put ourselves in very, very dangerous places, in harmful places, and we've lost ourselves in those places. So coming back to that. So getting to explore the true self, so the masks are dropped. That's why it's called unmasking codependency, because the masks of codependency are as follows. You could be from the grandiose, the bully, or you can be the enabler or the accommodator. They're two ends of the same coin. They're a loss of self. So people say, oh no, but codependents are all like Mother Teresa types. Not really. At the heart of every single addiction, whether it's drug, food, or alcohol, sits underneath that codependency. So we show up in different ways. And in the family structure, if the enabler, rescuer role is taken, then the persecutor needs to also be taken, because each of us needs validation in different ways in a family dynamic. So we see these roles played out in the family. Did you see how nicely that mask dropped? It took me a long time to get that. Couple of times. So where do we start? Where do we start with recovery? And one of the really tricky things with codependency is a lot of people go, I'm codependent, I'm in recovery, but I can still drink. And codependency is an addiction. And a lot of codependents actually need to look at all of the other stuff also. It took me a long time to work with that, but we need to abstain from some of the stuff that we do in order to heal. And that takes a lot of humility and a lot of honesty. And then the awareness that comes with that abstinence, when you're working a program of really looking at yourself. And new behaviors, and one of them for me was around assertive communication, because adult children and codependents are so afraid of people in authority. It's really tricky. So it's come a long way for me to be able to stand up and speak about a topic like this without the nerves, because it would have terrorized me in the past. And then acceptance, and John mentioned, John and I are both doing the mindfulness course at Stellenbosch at the moment. For me, mindfulness has been the biggest healer by far. And the addicts, the alcoholics, my favorite people in the world that I work from a compassionate place. I feel enough has been shamed and done, and on some level the treatment centres, I try and go out and be the voice of reason that we need to do more around compassion for addiction. And I think what John was talking about too for me really works. There's already enough shame and trauma. We don't need to re-shame and re-stigmatize. And I suppose that's the film festival too, is really going towards that. So when we can stop for a moment and just know that we can't change anybody else. The first step of it is we're powerless over others, and my life has become unmanageable. That was a real, real big one. Powerlessness, by the way, does not mean helpless. It's a deeper surrender. So we need to first discover who we are in this process of recovery. And I really love this. It is going into the abyss that we recover the treasures of life, Joseph Campbell. And, I thought if I've just got 1 minute. So what I'd like to do in the spirit of mindfulness, in mindfulness we always read a poem, so John will know this. And a poem engages another part of you. It engages the heart. Codependents like to live in the head. They think they've got solutions for every problem. I'm seeing a lot of codependency. A lot of knowledge. It's the human condition. So perhaps just uncross your legs for a moment and just put everything down and let these words wash over you. It's a really beautiful poem, and I'll maybe make it available on the website if you like it. It's Mark Nepo, and he writes the poem called The Way Under the Way. So for all that has been written, for all that has been read, we are led to this instant where one of us will speak and one of us will listen, as if no one has ever placed an oar into that water. It doesn't matter how we come to this. We may jump to it or we may be worn to it because of great pain or a sudden raw feeling that this is all very real. It may happen in the parking lot when we break the eggs in the rain, or watching each other in our grief. But here we will come, with very little left in the way. When we meet like this, I may not have the words, so let me say it now. Nothing compares to the sensation of being alive in the company of another. Nothing compares to the sensation of being alive in the company of another. It is God breathing on the embers of our soul. Stripped of causes and plans and things to strive for, I have discovered everything I could need or ask for is right here, in flawed abundance, in flawed abundance. We cannot eliminate hunger, but we can learn to feed each other. And we cannot eliminate loneliness, but we can learn to hold each other. We cannot eliminate pain, but we can live a life of compassion. Ultimately, we are all small living things awakened in the stream, not gods who carved the rivers. Like human fish, we are asked to experience meaning in the life that moves through the gill of our heart. There is nothing to do. There's nothing to do and there's nowhere to go. Accepting this, we can do everything and go anywhere. Thank you.